If you told me back in the winter of 2003 that I would end up holding the hand of the most powerful woman in Manhattan, I would have laughed until I cried. Back then, I was nobody. Just a ghost in a cheap beige dress navigating the concrete jungle of New York City. Before I tell you how a shy intern melted the heart of the toughest CEO on Wall Street, please subscribe to the RP Forbidden Romances channel to support our stories. My name is Lily. I am 21 years old, and this is the story of how I stopped being invisible. The Sterling Corp building was a fortress of steel and glass that scraped the gray sky of Midtown. I worked in the marketing archives, a small, windowless room in the basement where the sun never reached, and the dust settled on forgotten files. My job was simple: organize paperwork, fetch coffee for people who didn't know my name, and remain silent. Being of Asian descent, people often stereotyped me as quiet and submissive, which made it even easier to fade into the background. I didn't mind the silence, mostly because it allowed me to observe her without being noticed. Monica Sterling wasn't just a boss. She was a force of nature that terrified and fascinated everyone in the city. At 40 years old, she moved through the corridors with a sharp elegance, her designer heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown. She was beautiful in a dangerous way, with pale skin and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through your soul. Everyone feared her. They called her the Ice Queen behind her back, whispering about her ruthless business deals and her supposedly frozen heart. The tabloids said she was married to a wealthy investor, but we never saw him at the office or at charity galas. There were no family photos on her expansive mahogany desk, no husband picking her up for lunch, and no flowers delivered on Valentine's Day. She arrived alone in her town car and left alone long after everyone else had gone home to their families in the suburbs. To the rest of the world, she had everything: money, power, and beauty. But from my corner in the archives, all I saw was a deep, crushing solitude that matched my own. I don't know when my fear turned into admiration, and then into something softer and more painful. Maybe it was the way she sighed when she thought no one was looking, a sound so heavy it seemed to crack her perfect posture for a second. I started memorizing her schedule and her coffee order: black, no sugar, and even the specific brand of perfume she wore. It smelled like sandalwood and jasmine, a sophisticated scent that lingered in the elevator long after she was gone, haunting me. One afternoon, I was called to deliver some old contracts to the main boardroom during a heated strategy meeting. The room was full of men in expensive gray suits, shouting over each other, their egos filling the space like cigar smoke. I tried to slide the papers onto the table without making a sound, feeling like an intruder in a boys' club. One of the directors knocked his water glass over, splashing my arm with ice water, and didn't even apologize. He just kept talking as if the furniture had moved, not a person. I froze, clutching the wet folder against my chest, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks in humiliation. I expected to be scolded for being in the way, or for ruining the mood. Suddenly, the room went dead silent. Monica wasn't looking at the man who was speaking. She was looking directly at me. Her blue eyes locked onto mine, not with annoyance, but with a strange, fierce intensity. It was the first time anyone in that room had acknowledged my existence as a human being. She raised a hand, silencing the loud director mid-sentence with a single gesture. "Thank you, Lily," she said, her voice low and calm, cutting through the tension like a knife. She even used my name. She handed me a linen napkin from her own side of the table to dry my arm. It was a small gesture, almost insignificant to anyone else. But for me, it felt like the earth had shifted on its axis. She saw me. The Ice Queen actually saw me. I walked out of that room with my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. That brief moment replayed in my head for weeks, fueling a fantasy I knew was impossible. I started staying later at the office, just to catch a glimpse of her leaving, inventing work that didn't exist. I told myself it was professional dedication, but I knew I was lying. I was just a lonely intern with a crush on a woman who lived in a penthouse I could only dream of. December arrived, bringing with it the mandatory end-of-year corporate party at a fancy hotel in Times Square. It was the one night where the hierarchy was supposed to relax, though everyone knew it was just another arena for office politics and fake smiles. I debated not going. I didn't have a fancy dress, and I certainly didn't have anyone to talk to among the managers and directors. But the thought of seeing her outside of those glass walls, perhaps a little more human, was too tempting to resist. I wore a simple nude dress I'd bought on sale, trying to look presentable enough not to be stopped by security. The venue was a rooftop lounge with a breathtaking view of the Manhattan skyline, filled with people holding champagne glasses and laughing too loudly. I stood near a large decorative plant, nursing a sparkling water, watching the crowd part as she walked in. She looked devastating in a tight black velvet dress, but something was wrong. Monica wasn't holding court or charming investors like she usually did. She went straight to the bar and ordered a whiskey, drinking it faster than I'd ever seen her drink anything. Her shoulders were slumped, and for a split second, the mask slipped completely. She looked lost, standing there surrounded by hundreds of people who wanted something from her. I knew I should stay away, stay invisible in my safe corner, but my feet started moving on their own. I had no idea that walking across that floor would be the most dangerous thing I'd ever do. The music was loud, a thumping bass that seemed to shake the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Times Square. But around Monica, there was a strange, vacuum-like silence. I watched as she signaled the bartender for another drink, her movements slightly uncoordinated, a stark contrast to her usual surgical precision. It wasn't just that she was drinking, it was the way she was doing it, like she wanted to drown something inside her before it screamed. She looked fragile, a porcelain doll teetering on the edge of a shelf, and nobody seemed to care that she was about to fall. I scanned the room and felt a knot of anger tighten in my stomach. The other executives, the men who usually bowed and scraped for her approval, were huddled in small groups, casting side glances and smirking. I saw a VP from sales whisper something to a colleague, both of them snickering as they watched their boss sway slightly in her heels. They weren't concerned, they were entertained. To them, the Ice Queen melting down was a spectator sport, a chance to see the mighty Monica Sterling humiliated. I couldn't stand it. The protective instinct that surged through me was irrational, given that I was just an intern who made photocopies, but I couldn't watch them dissect her dignity. I put my water glass down on a passing tray and smoothed the front of my cheap dress. My heart hammered against my ribs, louder than the music, as I crossed the invisible line that separated the general staff from the executive circle. I was terrified, but the thought of leaving her to these vultures was worse. "Mrs. Sterling?" I said, my voice trembling slightly as I reached her side. She didn't hear me at first, staring blankly into the amber liquid in her glass. I stepped closer, entering her personal space, a zone that was usually forbidden territory. "Mrs. Sterling, it's Lily, from Archives." She turned her head slowly, her blue eyes glassy and unfocused. For a moment, she looked at me like I was a stranger, but then a flicker of recognition sparked behind the haze. "Lily," she murmured, the word rolling off her tongue with a softness that sent a shiver down my spine. She leaned against the mahogany bar, her composure hanging by a thread. "You're the quiet one, the one who sees everything." "I think it's time to go," I whispered, leaning in so the smirking VP wouldn't hear. I tried to sound confident, like I did this every day, though my palms were sweating. "The car is waiting downstairs. Let me help you." I didn't know if the car was actually waiting, but I knew I had to get her out of that room before she did something she'd regret on Monday morning. Monica looked at the crowd, her expression hardening for a second before crumbling back into exhaustion. "Home," she said, the word sounding like a question. "Empty. It's always empty, Lily." The raw pain in her voice was like a physical blow. She tried to push off the bar to stand straight, but her heel caught on the plush carpet. She stumbled, pitching forward. I moved on instinct, catching her by the elbow before she could fall. Her skin was burning hot against my cool hands, and the scent of sandalwood and jasmine enveloped me, dizzying and intoxicating. A few heads turned our way, eager for the crash, but I steadied her quickly, pulling her arm through mine to make it look like we were just walking together. "I've got you," I said firmly, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "Just lean on me." Navigating the crowded room felt like walking through a minefield. I kept my head high, staring down anyone who dared to look too long, acting as a human shield between Monica and the prying eyes of her employees. I could feel the weight of her body against mine, her breathing shallow and uneven. She wasn't the CEO anymore. She was just a woman who had carried too much for too long, and for the first time, she was letting someone else help carry the load. We made it to the elevator and the doors slid shut, cutting off the noise of the party. The sudden silence was deafening. Monica slumped against the mirrored wall, closing her eyes. "They hate me," she whispered, not slurring as much now, but sounding incredibly young. "They smile, and they hate me." I wanted to tell her that I didn't hate her, that I admired her more than anyone I'd ever known. But the elevator dinged, opening into the freezing December lobby. The valet brought her Blacktown car around almost immediately. I opened the back door for her, intending to make sure she got in safely, and then catch the subway back to my tiny apartment in Queens. But as she slid onto the leather seat, she reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingers digging into my skin. "Don't!" she pleaded, looking up at me with panic in those blue eyes. "Please don't leave me alone tonight." I looked at the driver, who stared straight ahead, indifferent. Then I looked back at Monica. I knew getting into that car was crossing a line I could never uncross. It was unprofessional, it was dangerous, and it was exactly what I wanted. I climbed in beside her and closed the door, shutting out the cold, harsh world of New York City. As the car pulled away into the traffic, Monica let out a sigh and rested her head on my shoulder, and I knew there was no turning back. The car ride was a blur of city lights and silent tension, ending in front of a building on the Upper East Side that looked more like a fortress than a home. The doorman greeted Mrs. Sterling with a practiced nod, ignoring my cheap coat as I guided her toward the private elevator. As we ascended to the penthouse, the silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I was terrified that she'd sober up and realize she'd brought the intern home, but she just leaned her head back against the mirrored wall, eyes closed, humming a sad tune I didn't recognize. When the elevator doors opened directly into her apartment, I gasped. It was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the entire Manhattan skyline, but it was freezing. The furniture was sleek, modern, and white, so white it looked like no one had ever sat on it. There were no personal photos, no throw blankets, no signs of life. It felt less like a home, and more like a high-end museum exhibit where you aren't allowed to touch anything. "Welcome to the Ice Palace," Monica murmured, kicking off her heels the moment we stepped onto the marble floor. She stumbled slightly, and I rushed to steady her again, my hands finding her waist. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, she leaned into my touch, her body heat radiating through the velvet of her dress. She looked around the empty room with a disdain that broke my heart. "Big, isn't it? Plenty of room for absolutely nothing." I helped her to the massive white sofa, trying to ignore how my heart was hammering against my ribs. "I'll get you some water," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the cavernous space. I found the kitchen, a pristine laboratory of stainless steel, and poured a glass of water with trembling hands. I knew I should leave. I'd done my duty. I'd made sure she was safe. But the thought of leaving her alone in this beautiful, cold mausoleum felt impossible. When I returned, she hadn't moved, but she was watching me. Her blue eyes were clearer now, stripped of the corporate armor she wore like a second skin. "You stayed," she said softly, taking the glass from my hand. Her fingers brushed mine, sending a jolt of electricity straight to my core. "Most people run away when the mask falls off, Lily. Why are you still here?" "I couldn't leave you," I admitted, sitting on the edge of the coffee table so I could look her in the eye. "You looked lonely." It was a dangerous thing to say to your boss, an observation that cut too close to the bone. I held my breath, waiting for the reprimand, waiting for the Ice Queen to freeze me out. Instead, she laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "Lonely," she repeated, swirling the water in her glass. "I have millions in the bank, Lily. I have a husband who is busy in Europe. I have a company that fears me. But you're right. I haven't been touched, really touched, by anyone in years. Not without an agenda. Not without wanting something." She placed the glass on the table and leaned forward, invading my personal space. The scent of sandalwood and jasmine overwhelmed me. She was so close I could count the golden flecks in her irises. "What do you want, Lily?" she whispered, her voice dropping to a husky register that made my knees weak. She wasn't asking about a promotion or a raise. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. I didn't answer with words. I couldn't. My gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a silent confession of the months I'd spent watching her from the shadows. Monica saw it. The realization dawned on her face, but there was no disgust, only a sudden, intense hunger that mirrored my own. She reached out, her cool hand cupping my cheek, her thumb tracing my lower lip. "You see me?" she breathed, as if it was a revelation. "You really see me." Then she closed the distance. The kiss wasn't tentative. It was a collision. It tasted of whiskey and desperation, a release of pressure that had been building for months. I forgot she was my boss. I forgot about the empty apartment and the snowy city outside. I only knew the softness of her lips and the way she sighed into my mouth, a sound of pure relief. Her hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. We moved blindly, guided only by the heat of our bodies. The velvet of her dress felt soft under my fingertips, a stark contrast to the fire spreading through my veins. Every touch felt electric, every gasp a secret we were sharing in the dark. We stumbled toward the bedroom, leaving the lights of the city behind us. That night, there were no titles, no hierarchies, no tomorrow. There was only the sound of our breathing and the feeling of skin against skin, a memory that would be burned into my mind forever. I had walked into the lion's den, and instead of being devoured, I was being consumed by a passion I never knew existed. The morning light was gray and unforgiving, filtering through the sheer curtains of the penthouse bedroom. I woke up to a silence so deep it felt heavy, a stark contrast to the constant noise of my apartment in Queens. For a split second, I didn't know where I was, disoriented by the luxurious feel of high thread count sheets against my skin. Then, the scent of sandalwood and jasmine hit me, and the memories of the night before came rushing back like a tidal wave, drowning me in instant panic. I turned my head slowly, terrified of what I might find. Monica was sleeping beside me, her dark hair fanned out across the white pillow like ink on paper. She looked impossibly young and vulnerable, the sharp lines of worry on her forehead smoothed away by sleep. Her arm was thrown carelessly over the duvet, and the sight of her bare shoulder sent a jolt of heat through me, followed immediately by a crushing wave of fear. What have I done? The thought screamed in my mind. I was the intern. She was the CEO. She was married. I had crossed every professional and moral line in the book, and I had done it with the one person who held my entire future in her hands. When she woke up and the alcohol wore off, she wouldn't see Lily, the girl who understood her. She would see a liability, A mistake. A regret to be swept under the rug along with the empty whiskey glasses. I couldn't be here when she opened those piercing blue eyes. I couldn't handle the look of confusion, or worse, disgust, that would inevitably replace the passion we had shared. I had to disappear. I had to go back to being a ghost before reality crashed down on both of us. I slid out of the massive bed, my movements slow and calculated, holding my breath every time the mattress shifted. The marble floor was freezing against my bare feet, a harsh reminder of the cold world waiting outside. I found my cheap beige dress in a heap on the floor, looking pathetic against the pristine white carpet. Putting it back on felt like putting on a costume that no longer fit, the fabric scratching my skin that still hummed from her touch. I tiptoed around the room, gathering my shoes and my purse, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would wake her. I paused at the foot of the bed, unable to resist looking at her one last time. She stirred slightly, murmuring something unintelligible in her sleep, and shifted to the side where I had been lying, seeking warmth. The sight broke my heart. She wasn't the Ice Queen right now. She was just a woman reaching out for someone who wasn't there. I needed to leave, but I couldn't just vanish without a trace. It felt cruel, after everything we had shared in the dark. I went to the ensuite bathroom, which was larger than my entire kitchen, and filled a crystal glass with water. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it. I placed the glass gently on the nightstand beside her, a small offering for the headache I knew she would have later. As I set it down, I noticed one of my fake pearl earrings lying on the marble surface, right next to her Cartier watch. I reached out to take it, to erase the evidence of my presence, but my hand stopped in midair. I left it there. Maybe it was an accident, or maybe a subconscious part of me wanted her to know this wasn't a dream. I wanted to leave a piece of myself in this ivory tower, a tiny anchor to prove that for one night, I had been real to her. The cheap plastic pearl looked ridiculous next to her diamond watch, a perfect metaphor for us. I backed out of the room, the silence screaming in my ears. The walk to the private elevator felt like a funeral procession. I pressed the button and watched the doors slide shut, sealing away the only warmth I had ever known. As the numbers on the display ticked down, taking me further away from her, I felt a physical ache in my chest, a hollowness that hadn't been there before. The doorman in the lobby gave me a knowing, judgmental look as I scurried past him, my heels clicking loudly in the empty hall. He didn't say a word, but his raised eyebrow said everything. Another one leaving the walk of shame. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors and stepped out into the biting December wind of the Upper East Side. The city was just waking up, the streets gray and slushy. I walked toward the subway station, wrapping my thin coat tighter around myself. But I couldn't shake the cold. I was going back to my life of photocopies and invisibility, back to the archives where I belonged. But as I descended into the dark subway tunnel, I knew Monday morning was looming like a storm, and I had no idea how I would survive looking into her eyes again. Sunday passed in a blur of anxiety and exhaustion, a stark gray contrast to the technicolor intensity of Saturday night. My apartment in Queens felt smaller than usual, the peeling paint and the leaking faucet mocking me for where I truly belonged. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, my body aching in places I didn't know could ache, a physical map of everything that had happened between us. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that penthouse, drowning in white sheets and the scent of sandalwood. I tried to scrub the memory of her off my skin in the shower, the water scalding hot until the mirror fogged up. But the scent of her expensive perfume seemed to have seeped into my pores, refusing to be washed away by cheap bar soap. It was maddening. I didn't want to forget, but I was terrified that remembering would destroy me. I wrapped a towel around myself and wiped the steam from the mirror, dreading what stared back. My reflection was the same, yet entirely different. My lips were swollen, a visible testament to the hunger we had shared. But it was when the towel slipped slightly that my heart stopped. There, on the curve of my neck, just below the jawline, was a faint, purple bruise. A love bite, a mark of possession left by the woman who owned the skyline. I traced it with my fingertips, shivering as the ghost of her lips returned to haunt me. I realized then that I wasn't the only one marked. I remembered the way my nails had dug into her shoulders when the pleasure became too much to bear. I remembered the red flush on her pale skin, the way she had unraveled beneath me. If I carried the memory of her on my skin, she had to carry mine too. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Would she look in the mirror today and see the evidence of the intern she had taken to bed? Panic set in as the adrenaline faded. What if she didn't remember? What if the alcohol had wiped her mind clean, and she woke up confused by the bruises, disgusted by the scent of a stranger in her bed? The silence of my phone was deafening. Every time it didn't ring, my stomach twisted into a tighter knot. I checked it 100 times, hoping for a message, a sign, anything to prove I wasn't crazy. But the screen remained dark. Then, a cold realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. My hand went to my earlobe and found only bare skin. My earring, the fake pearl stud I wore every day. I must have left it there. I tried to retrace my steps in my mind, the nightstand, the marble surface next to her diamond watch. I had left a piece of my pathetic bargain bin life right next to her millions. I paced the small length of my living room, chewing on my thumbnail until it bled. If she found it, she would know exactly who had been there. There was no hiding now. The earring was a smoking gun, a tangible proof that Lily from Archives had been in the CEO's bed. I imagined her waking up, the headache pounding, her blue eyes narrowing as she picked up the cheap plastic pearl. Would she throw it in the trash with a sneer? Or would she hold it, trying to piece together the fragments of the night? The doubt began to consume me, a monster feeding on my insecurity. Maybe I was just a convenient body, a warm presence to stave off the loneliness of a rich woman for one night. Maybe by Monday, I would just be another regret, a lapse in judgment to be rectified with a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. The thought made me nauseous. I spent the rest of the day in a state of paralysis, unable to eat or focus on the book I tried to read. The sun went down, casting long shadows across my room that looked like prison bars. I felt like a criminal waiting for the police to arrive, except the crime was falling in love with someone who was galaxies out of my reach. The connection we had felt so real, so undeniable in the dark, but in the harsh light of Sunday, it felt like a hallucination. Night fell, bringing with it a suffocating dread of the morning. I laid out my work clothes for Monday, a boring gray skirt and a blouse that buttoned all the way to the chin to hide the mark on my neck. It felt like putting on armor for a war I was destined to lose. I looked at the empty space on the hanger where my beige dress usually hung, now crumpled in a hamper, smelling of her. I tried to sleep, but insomnia was my only companion. Every time I drifted off, I heard the click of her heels, saw the flash of her blue eyes, felt the weight of her body on mine. I tossed and turned, tangling in sheets that felt too rough, too cold. I was addicted, and withdrawal was already setting in. By the time my alarm screamed at 6 a.m, I hadn't slept a wink. I stared at the ceiling, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Today was the day of reckoning. Today, I would have to walk into that glass fortress and face the Ice Queen. I didn't know if I was walking into a firing squad or a fairy tale, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't the same girl who had left on Friday. Walking into the Sterling Corp building on Monday morning felt less like going to work, and more like walking to my own execution. The familiar whoosh of the revolving doors sounded like a guillotine blade dropping, and the chilled air of the lobby hit my skin like a physical warning. I kept my head down, clutching my bag tightly to my side, terrified that security would stop me at the turnstiles and escort me out for trespassing on the CEO's life. But the light turned green, and I passed through, just another invisible cog in the machine, carrying a secret that felt heavy enough to sink the entire building. The day was a masterclass in psychological torture. Every time the elevator dinged, I jumped. Every time a phone rang in the archives, my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I tried to focus on filing contracts, but my hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped a stack of confidential files. I was waiting for the summons, for human resources to call me down and hand me a cardboard box, or for Monica herself to storm in and eviscerate me with a single glare. I saw her around noon, and it was worse than I imagined. She was walking through the lobby with a phalanx of lawyers, looking every inch the Ice Queen. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her suit was a sharp, armor-like gray, and her face was a mask of absolute indifference. I froze, pressing myself against a wall of filing cabinets, praying she wouldn't see me. She didn't. She walked right past the glass partition of my department without even a flicker of recognition, her gaze fixed on some distant point of profit and loss. It was as if Saturday night had been a hallucination. I had been erased. The rejection stung more than any yelling could have. It confirmed my worst fear. I was just a drunken mistake, a lapse in judgment she had already scrubbed from her hard drive. I spent the afternoon in a haze of misery, moving like a zombie, just waiting for the clock to hit 5 so I could go home and cry. But at 4:45, the phone on my desk rang. It wasn't HR. It was her personal assistant, Sarah, her voice clipped and professional. "Mrs. Sterling wants to see you in her office. Now." The walk to the top floor took a lifetime. My legs felt like lead, and my stomach was twisting into knots so tight I thought I might be sick. When I stepped out of the elevator, the executive floor was eerily quiet. Most of the assistants had already left for the day. Sarah pointed to the heavy double doors at the end of the hall, and then gathered her purse, leaving me alone in the lion's den. I took a deep breath, smoothed my skirt with sweaty palms, and knocked. "Enter." Her voice was low, devoid of emotion. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was vast, with the Manhattan skyline bleeding into twilight through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Monica was standing by her desk, her back to me, staring out at the city she conquered every day. She didn't turn around when the door clicked shut behind me. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until the only sound was the thudding of my own heart. Then, I heard it. The slow, deliberate click of her heels on the hardwood floor as she finally turned to face me. She walked toward me, not stopping until she was uncomfortably close, invading my personal space just like she had at the party. But this time, there was no smell of whiskey, only the sharp, clean scent of sandalwood and power. Her blue eyes were clear, cold, and assessing, dissecting me layer by layer. I couldn't breathe. I braced myself for the firing, for the anger. "You forgot this," she said, her voice betraying nothing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out my cheap, fake pearl earring. She held it out to me, the plastic looking ridiculous in her manicured hand. I reached for it, my fingers brushing hers, and the spark that jumped between us was undeniable. She didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her fingers around mine, trapping my hand. "Why did you run?" she asked, the question sharp and sudden, cracking the ice in her voice. I woke up and the bed was cold. "You didn't even leave a note. You just vanished." There was a flash of hurt in her eyes, raw and unguarded, that knocked the wind out of me. She wasn't angry that I had stayed. She was angry that I had left. I was scared, I stammered, the truth spilling out before I could stop it. "You're Monica Sterling. I'm just an intern. I thought you'd wake up and hate yourself for what happened. I thought you'd hate me." I looked down at our joined hands, fighting back tears. "I didn't want to be a mistake you had to fix." Monica let out a breath that sounded like a shudder. She dropped my hand and took a step closer, cupping my face with both hands, forcing me to look at her. "A mistake? she whispered, her thumb tracing the line of my jaw, right over the hidden bruise she had left there. Lily, that was the first time in 10 years I felt alive. The only mistake was thinking I could let you walk out of here and pretend it didn't happen. But your husband, the company, I whispered, my voice trembling. We can't. I don't care about the company right now, she said fiercely, her eyes darkening with intent. And my husband hasn't looked at me in years. She leaned in, her forehead resting against mine. I can't promise you it will be easy. I can't promise you the world won't try to tear us apart. But I can't let you go back to the archives and pretend we're strangers. I won't. Then she kissed me. It wasn't the desperate, liquor-fueled collision of Saturday night. It was slow, sober, and terrifyingly real. It was a seal on a contract I hadn't read, but was ready to sign with my life. Her lips were soft but demanding, claiming me right there in the center of her empire. When she pulled back, breathless, she looked me in the eye with a terrifying clarity. Nobody can know, she whispered, a command and a plea wrapped in one. For now, this is ours. Just ours. And just like that, I became a co-conspirator in the most dangerous game in New York. 2 years later, the silence in the penthouse wasn't lonely anymore. It was the comfortable, warm silence of a home built for two. If you had told the old Lily that she would be waking up every Sunday next to Monica Sterling, not as a secret lover, but as a partner, she wouldn't have believed it. But time has a way of rewriting even the most impossible scripts. We had weathered the storm of her divorce, the whispers in the tabloids, and the skepticism of the board, emerging on the other side stronger, calloused, and deeply in love. Monica wasn't the ice queen here. In the safety of our bedroom, with the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, she was just Monica. She was 42 now, though she looked timeless, her skin glowing in the gray morning light. We were tangled together under the duvet, the remnants of breakfast on the nightstand, enjoying the rare luxury of having absolutely nowhere to be. It was in these quiet moments that I felt the depth of what we had built, a sanctuary where the CEO could take off her armor and just breathe. But that particular Sunday, the air felt heavier than usual. I was tracing patterns on her arm, humming softly, when I felt her stiffen. It was subtle. A slight tension in her shoulders, a shallowing of her breath. But after living in her space and her heart for 2 years, I had become an expert in Monica's micro-expressions. The peace that usually filled our Sunday mornings had been replaced by a familiar dark cloud that I hadn't seen in months. "What is it?" I whispered, propping myself up on one elbow to look at her. Her blue eyes were fixed on the rain sliding down the glass, distant and filled with a melancholy that made my chest ache. She didn't answer immediately. She reached out and took my hand, intertwining our fingers tightly, as if she were afraid I might slip away if she let go. "Do you ever think about what we leave behind, Lily?" she asked, her voice quiet and raspy. "Not the money or the buildings with the Sterling name on them. I mean, really leave behind." It wasn't a rhetorical question. It was a wound she was poking, checking to see if it still bled. "You've built an empire, Mon," I said softly, using the nickname only I was allowed to use. "You've changed the skyline of this city." She laughed, but there was no humor in it, only a bitter edge. "Skyscrapers are just steel and concrete. They don't have a heartbeat. They don't look at you with your mother's eyes." She turned to face me, and the raw vulnerability in her expression took my breath away. "I froze my eggs 10 years ago. Did you know that? I was 32, ambitious, and terrifyingly sure I could pause time. I thought I'd have the career first, then the family. I thought I had all the time in the world." I stayed silent, letting her speak. I knew about the frozen eggs. It was in her medical file that I had once organized in the archives, a detail I had glossed over back then. Hearing her say it now, with such regret, gave the fact a heartbreaking weight. But life just kept happening, she continued, a tear escaping the corner of her eye. My marriage was a sham, the company demanded my soul, and suddenly I'm 42. My doctor says my uterus is inhospitable for a geriatric pregnancy. That's the medical term, geriatric. It sounds like I'm already dead. She wiped the tear away angrily. I have these potentials sitting in a freezer in a lab uptown. My genetic legacy, frozen in time, waiting for a mother who missed her bus. It's not too late, I said instinctively, my protective instinct flaring up. There are surrogates. We have resources. Monica shook her head, closing her eyes. I don't want a stranger carrying my child, Lily. I don't want a transaction. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to be the one to bring life into this world, to fix the mistakes my parents made with me. But my body made the choice for me. She rolled onto her back, staring at the ceiling. It's the only deal I ever lost, and it's the only one that truly matters. Her pain filled the room, suffocating the coziness of the morning. I looked at her, the woman who had given me confidence, love, and a life I never dreamed of, and I felt a fierce, burning need to fix this for her. She had given me the world. How could I let her live with this one gaping hole in her heart? I looked down at my own body. I was 23 now, young, healthy, and overflowing with love for this woman. I thought about the frozen possibilities waiting in that lab, the pieces of Monica that just needed a safe harbor to grow. The idea hit me not as a fleeting thought, but as a lightning bolt of clarity. It was crazy. It was huge. It was permanent. I didn't say anything then. I just kissed her forehead and pulled her closer, letting her cry the tears she had held back for a decade. But as the rain continued to fall over New York City, my mind was racing. Her birthday was coming up in a week. She thought her dream was dead, buried under the weight of time and biology. But as I listened to the rhythm of her breathing, I realized that I held the power to wake it up. I knew exactly what I was going to give her. Monica hated birthdays. To the rest of the world, turning 42 was just another number for the timeless Monica Sterling, but to her, it was a ticking clock growing louder in an empty room. I knew she wanted to ignore the day entirely, bury herself in mergers and acquisitions, and pretend that another year hadn't slipped through her fingers. But I couldn't let her do that. I had spent the entire week planning a private celebration in the Penthouse, something intimate that whispered, "I love you," rather than shouting, "Happy birthday." The evening was quiet, the city lights of Manhattan glittering below us like spilled diamonds on black velvet. I had cooked her favorite meal, risotto with truffle oil, filling the sterile white kitchen with warm, earthy scents. We sat on the floor by the window, a bottle of vintage red wine between us, watching the snow begin to fall over Central Park. She looked breathtaking in a simple silk robe, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, but her smile was thin, fragile as glass. "You didn't have to do this, Lily," she murmured, twirling the stem of her wine glass. "It's just a Tuesday, and I'm just older." The sadness in her voice was a physical weight in the room, a callback to our conversation from Sunday about legacy and lost time. She was mourning a child she never had, grieving a version of herself that biology had seemingly erased. "It's not just a Tuesday," I said softly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "It's the day the world got lucky enough to get you." I reached behind a cushion and pulled out a small navy blue velvet box. It looked like a jewelry box, the kind that usually holds diamond earrings or a sapphire necklace, gifts she could buy for herself 1,000 times over. Monica looked at the box and gave me a soft, indulgent smile, the kind you give a child who made you a drawing. "Lily, you know you don't need to spend your money on me. I have everything." She reached out and took the box, her fingers brushing mine. Her touch was cool, but my skin burned where we connected. "You don't have this," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. "Open it." The room went silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the wind howling outside. Monica untied the silver ribbon with agonizing slowness. She lifted the lid, expecting gold or platinum. Instead, she frowned, confused. There was no sparkle inside, just a folded piece of paper and a small, handwritten card resting on a bed of white satin. She looked up at me, her blue eyes filled with questions, before reaching in to take the paper. As she unfolded it, I saw her eyes scan the header. It wasn't a receipt. It was a medical report from the most reputable fertility clinic in New York. Her name was listed as the intended parent, and mine was listed as the gestational carrier. "What is this?" she breathed, her voice barely audible. Her hands started to shake, rattling the paper. She read the results. Candidate: Lily. Age: 23. Uterine health: optimal. Hormone levels: perfect. It was a clean bill of health, a green light from biology itself. "Read the card," I urged gently, moving closer to her until our knees were touching. I was terrified. This was either the greatest gift of her life or an overstep that would destroy us. Monica dropped the medical report onto the rug and picked up the small card. Her eyes darted across my handwriting. I had written it over and over again until it was perfect. "Your dream didn't end 10 years ago, Mon. Your eggs are waiting. My body is ready. Let me carry our child. Let me be the home for the piece of you that you thought you lost." A sound escaped her throat, a strangled sob that broke the stillness of the penthouse. The card slipped from her fingers. She stared at me with an expression of absolute shock, her mouth slightly open, tears instantly pooling in her eyes. It was raw, unguarded terror mixed with a hope so bright it looked painful. You would do that?" she choked out, her voice cracking. "Lily, you're 23. Your body, your life." She couldn't finish the sentence. She looked at my stomach, then back at my face, as if trying to reconcile the magnitude of the offer with the woman sitting in front of her. "I'm not offering my life, Monica. I'm offering to help create one," I said, reaching out to cup her face, wiping away a tear that had escaped. "I want a part of you in this world. I want to see you be the mother you were meant to be. I can do this. I want to do this." Monica grabbed my wrists, her grip tight, desperate. She searched my eyes for any sign of hesitation, any hint that I was doing this out of obligation or naivety. She found none. The realization hit her like a physical blow, that the impossible was suddenly, terrifyingly possible. She pulled me into her arms, burying her face in my neck, sobbing with a violence that shook her entire frame. But it wasn't the cry of a lonely CEO in an empty tower. It was the cry of a mother who had just been given a second chance. And as she clung to me, I knew there was no turning back. We were about to create a miracle, or a disaster. And that was just the beginning of our real journey. Stay tuned, because in the next part of this story, we will find out if this miracle actually happened, or if the challenges of the world outside our penthouse were too much for us to handle.